I don't really know where to begin with this video. Season 2, in my opinion, well, I don't really have an opinion for it. I don't have a strong feeling, strong emotions for season 2 um, when I first started writing this, at least. I've been wanting to do retrospectives for each season. And so, season 2, I approached this with the idea of okay, building off of season 1, what do they do with those building blocks? And revisiting this season has allowed me to see how good they take the things that they set up in season 1, build upon those, add more stuff in, and just go all out with what they want to do in the story. And I'm really, honestly, really proud of what they were able to accomplish in the second season of Magnus Archives. If you don't know, just in case, Magnus Archives is a horror podcast written by Johnny Sims, directed by Alexander J. Newell, produced by the Rusty Quill production company, and it is the thing that has encompassed my mind so much over the past few years. My name is David. I make videos talking about media and art that I want to talk about because my brain just needs to get this stuff out and just to tell people, you know? First and foremost, I do want to issue a spoiler alert for the entirety of the Magnus Archives. I will be talking about stuff in the perspective of someone who's seeing it for the first time, but with the knowledge of someone who knows everything about it. So there will be some things that I'll like interweave in here that it's like what it actually means, what it alludes to, etc. If it's not pertinent to the conversation, it really depends. Spoiler alert for the entirety of the Magnus Archives. Maybe for the Magnus Protocol, I might sprinkle in some ideas about that too, as well. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about my thoughts for season 2, the arcs that we go through, what changes occur with the people and the world and the story, and just sort of talk about the amazing work that they do.
Shall we start at the beginning then?
So this is my second time recording this because the first time I recorded, it went fine. It went fine, honestly. But I just didn't feel confident about what I was doing because I felt I was reading straight off of the script, which I will still do. However, I had a section here that was recapping season 1. It just did not feel genuine. Just didn't feel genuine. So in the past, at least, we know what happened in season 1. John Sims, he is head archivist of the Magnus Institute, London. And we come out of the first season having a big shakeup, one of the first big shakeups in the Magnus Archives, with the Jane Prentice attack concluding. And as a first-time listener, obviously, everything seems to have been fine. Everything seems to have come out hunky-dory and nothing bad has happened. Yes, there's that strange little moment when Sasha went into the, what was it called? Artifact storage. And she like screamed. And then like she came back and she was like, I see you. I see you. And we were like, what was that? You know, as a first-time listener, I thought it was something creepy that happened. And that'll be revealed later. But everything's fine so far. And everyone's happy. Well, as happy as you can be when a worm-infested woman attacks your institute. And in the aftermath of the attack, one of the biggest revelations occurs. We find Gertrude's body. And when I say we, I mean John Trivist, and us, the audience. Sometimes when I say we, it's going to be both of us. I'll clarify if it's not. Gertrude's body is found. She's no longer listed as officially disappeared. She's officially dead. So, season 2 begins with a question of who killed Gertrude Robinson. She was shot 3 times in the chest and left for dead in the tunnels, and her body was surrounded by several tapes. So, we, John and the audience, have the question of who killed Gertrude Robinson. And from this question stems several different other questions, secondary questions, more smaller, but still pertinent to the mystery. What is in the tunnels? The tunnels where Gertrude was found, there was a bunch of tunnels underneath the institute. What's in there? And why? Why the tunnels, you know? What was Gertrude doing? What was she doing that got her shot? She's an archivist. What was, you know? And why was she killed? Who shot her and for what reason? For the past 40 episodes, this story has been a horror anthology with a small storyline growing into the finale of season 1, which was the Jane Prentice attack. And now we begin season 2 as a dual piece of work almost, with still a main focus on an anthology format because the majority of the episodes are just anthology, but with a not as focused on, but still very much there, linear story. As a sequel season, unfortunately, I do have to think about it in terms of one of the best sequels ever, Shrek 2. I'm not going to talk about Shrek 2. I just know that Shrek 2 is a really good sequel because of what it does. And I'm not this is the last time I'm going to talk about Shrek 2. But the principles of Shrek 2 are going to be the focus of what I'm talking about because Shrek 2 is able to explore the world and expand the world and also reinforce what happens in the characters' lives, and it is growing outwards. And so that's why it's a really good sequel. Last time I talked about Shrek 2, okay? Last time. Anyways, this season, the sequel season, has a lot of work to do. It is rising action because we're in I don't know if in a first sort of listening through, if we knew how far this season was going to go, if we knew this season was going to have 200 total episodes. However, it's still presumably that there's going to be a lot of episodes and we're still in the very near beginning of it. It's rising action and it must do the legwork to maintain that momentum that we began in season 1, along with introducing new aspects to the story as well, considering that there's still so much more of the story that we have to get to. And as well, have a self-contained story within it, make sure that one season still stands alone alongside being part of a whole. What's the term? The sum of the parts is more than a whole or something like that? I don't know, something like that. They need to have a story within itself, which season 1 tried to do as well, and they did pretty well here. And I will, spoiler alert, tell you now that season 2's self-contained story, to me, is more exciting than season 1's. But it's comparing two really good cakes, but one of them is vanilla and one of them's lime, and I like lime more than vanilla, but I want to eat both cakes. I believe that the creator of the show, Johnny Sims, Alexander Newell, Rusty Quill, etc., do all of that I just said, all of those goals, very successfully this season. And they're able to set up for a very bombastic climax in the next season, season 3. I think I underrated season 2 when I first started writing this. When I think of seasons, honestly, season 2 seems to blend in between the sandwich of the beginning, which is always a beginning is the beginning, and the sandwich between the beginning and the unknowing, because the unknowing is the unknowing. You don't know, the unknowing. But season 2 has many merits. And I want to highlight them for this video, and the writing and the way that they do stuff here, because season 2 is so good.
Supplemental.
Who killed Gertrude Robinson? How does one even begin to investigate that? How does a government employee, John Sims, look into the death of his predecessor? John's answer to this is extreme and dangerous, because her body was found in the tunnels and was shot in the tunnels. He actually goes into the tunnels. Episode 41, Too Deep, John begins to investigate in the tunnels underneath the Institute. In his investigations, he learns that the tunnels were the remains of Millbank Prison, which was completed in 1821, and was designed by Robert Smirke, who is a name that has appeared at least twice by now before this episode. But we know very much he's a very important figure now. And the Millbank prison was based off the panopticon design by Jeremy Bentham, but were slightly altered. The prison was made of, quote, twisting corridors, doors at strange angles, and narrow passages so poorly lit inmates would need to feel their way along. During exploration, he starts making arrows on the walls to sort of like guide where he's going. So if he gets lost, he's, oh, this is the arrow I drew, let me go back here. And that's how he's making his way through. He would go in, get lost a bit, get out, go in again, and with like better supplies, and then he started doing the arrows. Eventually, during one of those excursions, he sees an arrow he did not draw. It points downwards, and despite his fear, he would rather die knowing the truth instead of living in ignorance, which is a big crux of John's character, which I will keep coming back to, his search for knowledge, sort of causing things, and they bring it up in the show itself, that John kept pushing for more and kept pushing for knowledge, and that led him to the tragedy of the Magnus archives. And so this is just one of the first instances that he like says it himself. He would rather die knowing the truth. So he pushes on. Eventually, as he's going down the passageway that the arrow was drawn towards, he notices the walls begin appearing closer. He doesn't see them moving, but they get closer. Like there was a wall like all the way over there, and then when he turns back, it's much closer, which is terrifying. And then he hears a voice telling him to leave, which he does. He gets back to his office, makes the recording that we're listening to right now, and he states his frustration on not finding anything, and sort of like his confusion about the arrow and the command to leave, like, why are you pointing downwards, but then tell me to leave? That just confuses him and frustrates him. Either way, to him, quote, finding whatever secrets might be lurking in these tunnels is my primary concern, which is a reasonable decision. In a mystery such as this, with paranormal occurrences and strange people, we, John, and the audience, but mostly the audience, want to know more, especially in a horror, not knowing stuff, the fear of the unknown is a big source of fear. And so the tunnels are an obvious show of something other occurring, other, capitalized O, other, something that must be understood to learn more, something to be investigated, right? Like there's a mystery going on. The tunnels are a big clue to that mystery, and we have to investigate that, right? And make sense for John to want to investigate the tunnels more. Except he doesn't. At the end of the statement, we get a new portion of the story that they introduce just in this second season, because it makes sense for the second season, and it makes sense they don't continue it, but it is the supplemental section. John adds a small part at the end of the recordings on his own personal recorder, just for himself and whoever replaces him if he ends up disappearing or dying. Sure, he is curious about the tunnels. He admits it. The tunnels are interesting. But what he really wants to do, what he really wants to get to the bottom of, is to find out who killed Gertrude Robinson. And from what was said last season, in the last episode, episode 40, the finale, someone human and mundane killed Gertrude Robinson. I mean, she was shot. A monster wouldn't shoot her. A monster would eat her. A monster would tear her apart. But she was shot by a human. And that human would not be in the tunnels. The tunnels is something other, something supernatural. Gertrude was killed mundanely. So, in this recording, in the first recording, not the supplemental, in the supplemental, he admits that he exaggerated in the original recording how much he cares for the tunnels, so that in case anybody is listening in on these recordings, someone is spying him or whatever, and he presumes the murderer, they will think he's focused on the tunnels, focused elsewhere, which in reality he'll be focused on them, the murderer. I personally don't really consume any mysteries beyond like Scooby-Doo. Mystery Incorporated was my jam when I was younger, so shout out to them. Knives Out and Knives Out Glass Onion, really great mysteries. Benoit Blanc, is that the name? Haunting in Venice. I watched that and it was really good. Um, and whatever mystery game that we tend to play in Dungeons and Dragons. That's the only mysteries I consume. This deception, this sort of switch up, is so genius on a writing standpoint and a story standpoint because it brings in the audience not just as an audience member, someone listening to this, but also as investigators as well. It invites us to investigate with John and brings in the audience in confidence. We are in this with John and no one else. We are investigating the story with John. We are the head archivist along with John and no one else. Before season 1, there was a level of separation that's very minimal, but now we are closer in separation. In creative writing, there is the concept of distance between the narrator and the audience. How distant is the narrator to the audience in terms of telling the story? Say, for example, Percy Jackson is telling us the story, and so the distance is pretty close. While in Lord of the Rings, it reads like a textbook, like someone has told the story, and we just find the textbook later. So the distance is pretty massive. And then we also get into like unreliable narrators, which I find hard to like comprehend. That's just a skill that I don't have. But here we have a very close distance between the narrator, John, and us, the audience, which I didn't get to talk about in season 4 because I didn't have the savvy that I have now. Plus, I also read about it on a Tumblr post. But it was talking about how this distance that is diminished in this season and season 3 is broken. We expect to have this sort of distance coming into season 4, but when we start seeing that John's doing stuff without us knowing, then it really hurts us. Then it becomes more horrifying that he's doing stuff without letting us like in. And so we begin to build that sort of trust that is eventually broken in season 4. Now in season 2, like it's really good writing to be able to have us want to listen and to investigate. John concludes this episode by stating how the paranoia that he has is new to him, but is helping him learn fast to stay alive. The supplemental sections will conclude almost every episode. I think there are like 5 episodes, not counting the finale arcs, that don't have supplementals. And these supplementals either have like a small tidbit of John's investigations or a larger moment of discovery. And these sections, the supplemental sections, more than anything they did in season 1, help make the story feel like it's moving. If we have this every single episode, then we follow along and make sure that every episode feels like something's happening. We are always reminded of what's happening in the background and keeps the story interesting. So for John's investigation, I'm only going to really cover like the first half because the second half tends to go into like end game moments, and I want to say this for like a little bit later. But for the first half of the season, he's doing his in supplementals. He does his own investigations into Martin, Tim, Elias, and Sasha, looking into why they started working at the institute, when, if they had any motive, means, or opportunity to have killed Gertrude, etc. He is trying to see if one of them killed Gertrude. This is when we see him like find out that Martin's lying to him about something, and that's when Martin reveals that he's lying on his CV. We don't really get a mention of Tim's brother disappearing, and that's why he's in the institute until like season 3, but like kind of sort of like alludes to it here. We get small mentions of Elias's beginning as like a stoner in the institute before he became elevated, before he was taken over. We're not there yet. And then like just small tidbits about Sasha. And so he's just trying to find different things that they do to see if anything matches up to them killing Gertrude Robinson. In a little moment of irony, we expect him to be doing his investigations quietly, but no. In episode 48, Lost in the Crowd, Elias confronts him with concerns from Martin and Tim, who have noticed that John has been spying on them. There are these moments that occur outside of like the recordings that are reported on from the past also help make feel like the story is progressing on its own, and we're only getting the parts that John is recording. So like he thinks these moments are important enough to tell us about them, so that he's bringing us into confidence. He promised to Elias to stop spying on his coworkers, which is a fat lie. And then in 60 Observer Effect, Elias, Tim, Sasha, and Martin stage an intervention by showing him their alibis during Gertrude's death, like video alibi, which convinces him that none of them killed Gertrude Robinson and allows him to start focusing more on the tunnels once again. Again, this sort of idea that John's push for knowledge is hurting him. John nearly destroys his relationships because of his investigations. His relationship with Tim never recovers before the end of season 3, when you know what happens at the end of season 3. And then we know what happens with Sasha and Elias. The only person that doesn't really change their relationship with John negatively is Martin. He stays by his side, and his relationship grows positively. But John very nearly threatens even that relationship with Martin. John's supplementals are a background storyline that weaves in and out of the episodes. And then other supplementals is when he starts investigating what Gertrude's been doing and other sort of revelations as well, which, like I said, we'll get to later in the video. But overall, the supplementals are just background. The foreground of the story that we are consuming are the statements. Like I said, the majority of the season is anthology. And that is where we begin to explore the world even more, building off of the statements from season 1.
No one says the P word.
Season 2 begins to unravel the world more thoroughly, taking us out of the Institute and showing us another aspect of the world that knows about the supernatural. Because all that we know is that we are in the Magnus Institute, but showing us a different aspect of the world that follows the same sort of information gathering type idea is really fun, honestly. In episode 43, section 31, we meet Basir Hussein, a police constable that responded to the attack from Jane Prentice, who came to the Institute after the fact to talk about her experience because she wanted to talk about it with somebody. And she ends up talking with someone who would listen, John, and by extension, us. In her statement, she explains how when police are sent to a disturbance or something, and it's a little weird, they are given a form to sign and become sanctioned. When you're giving this Section 31 form, you are part of this not elite force of policemen, but people that are first to be called on when something weird happens, because I think they said something about information, they don't share information with other people or something, non-disclosure agreements, it seems like, because they don't want the public to know about this bad stuff, or else it'd be really bad, Section 31 is a great concept to introduce at this point in the story, because it adds legitimacy to the phenomena we already know to be true. These statements are true. We know that. Even at a first time listen through, we know that it's all true. And it makes the statements John records not just isolated events, but observed occurrences that happen enough that a police force has to be created to respond to them. Basira and the other policemen become sanctioned. Also introduces the idea that more people know about the fears, the dread powers, even before we get the taxonomy. In a way, from how Basira notes it, those sanctioned don't even know about Smirke's 14 in terms of the names and classifications, but enough to know that these kind of paranormal events occur and how to respond to them. Specifically, how to respond to them, which is really interesting to see. In this statement, Basira tells John how she became sanctioned in the first place, an encounter with Diego Molina, who appeared in 12 First Aid, and the next genuine case that she saw, who was a man who just wouldn't die. She reported gunshots. And she was there with another sanctioned officer, Alice Daisy Tonner, who she says has been sanctioned longer than her, and was her partner at that time. Is still her partner, I think. So after the statement, John manages to convince her to give him some of the tapes that the police confiscated after finding Gertrude's body. And thus, Basira becomes a recurring character supplying John with Gertrude's tapes. I think that besides being a really great concept, I get introduced to Basira Hussein, and that's the best part of it, you know? Daisy Turner herself is introduced in episode 61, Hard Shoulder, where she shows up to give John a tape from Gertrude sent by Basira. And then it gives her own statement about the event that got her sanctioned because John's curious about it. It was when her and her police partner, Isaac Masters, stopped a slow moving van in the rain and encountered Breaking and Hope traveling with the coffin, which was last seen in Two Do Not Open. Breaking and Hope appeared like a handful of other times prior, but the coffin at least hadn't appeared since the second episode. It's been 61 minus 2 is 59 episodes since then. During this confrontation, Isaac is compelled to enter the coffin, gets trapped in there, and Daisy says that that was the last time she saw Isaac Masters. We know what happened to Isaac Masters. So I'm not going to talk about it because it's terrifying. So this episode specifically maintains the story of Section 31 as Daisy also confirms the existence of Trevor Herbert's vampires, further expanding the world, and also, like I said, how to deal with them. Like she calls them vampires, I think, or just mentions how she deals with them, not really in terms of knowing what they are, but how to kill them and stuff like that. Like she says that if someone comes in to get interrogated and the police person who's interrogating them responds as if they said anything verbally when they didn't, then they call Daisy, and Daisy comes and shoots them and kills them. Ugh. And also, this moment is also important to the overall story because John asks her if she wants to give a statement, and Daisy responds with anger. It's partially as she is how she is as a person. But I believe truly that this is one of the first moments we witness John asking a question and someone more or less being compelled to answer. We don't get a fuzz in the recordings, which we usually hear when John is purposely compelling someone, but he's not aware of this right now. He's not aware of this compulsion yet, and he's not trying to compulse. He's just asking her if she would want to. But Daisy responds and feels anger at him, asking how long she's been sanctioned. And it's as if she feels a compulsion as probably an early avatar of the hunt, probably someone being courted by the hunt anyways. But she can feel it. She can definitely feel it and responds with such anger. He asks her for her statement, and when she agrees to it, even after her angry response, he's surprised at it, and she says, "Maybe you caught me in the good mood," which is, I don't believe that for a second, because I think she was just covering up the compulsion. I don't think she even recognized what it was, and John's none the wiser either. So, John's using some of his powers here, If anyone else would have asked Daisy, she would not have answered. She would have answered equally as angry, even more, and probably would have killed him too. And after the statement, Daisy's very angry about her being taken over by this compulsion, telling the full story. And she tells John not to tell Basira about her story, gives him the tape, and just leaves. John's beginning to flex his powers here, and that's also really exciting to start seeing, because when he's just asking someone a question and they respond to it, that's just social norms. When he pushes to ask someone, that is his compulsion. That is him pushing for more knowledge, which is, like I said, tragic. The Section 31 storyline this season ends in episode 72, Takeaway, when Basira calls John and asks him if he knows anything about Maxwell Rayner, because they're going to go arrest him. He advises to bring flashlights, or torches, as they say in the UK, and the call cuts off. In 73, Police Lights, Basira follows up with John about the sting, and telling him about the kidnapping case of Callum Brody, is the son of the statement giver in episode 52, Exceptional Risk, which is, of course, where Robert Montauk dies in prison because of Maxwell Rayner. And she tells him also about the attack on the People's Church of the Divine Host, which we've seen multiple times prior. During this, Basira thanks John about the tip of the flashlights because that definitely helped. And she tells him about one of the officers, Leo Altman, was killed alongside Maxwell Rayner, who has appeared multiple times before, and Natalie Ennis, who appeared in 25 Growing Dark. In the end, Basira says she's quitting the police force and departs. She doesn't like how everything's been going, and it's just not her vibe, and she leaves. And John starts contemplating about quitting as well, but he is too entrenched in the mystery to do so. He's already been pushing for more knowledge, and he's like, I'm already too deep in here, episode 41. You know what I mean? Eventually, in 75 Long Way Down, even though the Section 31 storyline ended, Basira still is there as an active character. At the end of the statement, she barges in with a bunch of Gertrude's tapes, angry that the police force is covering up Altman's death by saying, quote, he was dirty and got stabbed in a botched drug deal, which she does not think is very fair at all. She gives John the tapes because no one else will investigate Gertrude's murder now that she's out of the police force, and she wants to help John. The Section 31 storyline has great implications for the world, establishing the fears as a known force in the world. Divorced of the taxonomy, divorced of classifications, it is a thing that people experience and people in power know about, and introduces to Basira Hussein, one of my favorite characters in the Magnus Archives. It creates a small storyline to the season, expanding the world, and it's a very, very cool way to do so.
You miss the unknowing, of course, but you won't understand it anyway.
Overall, besides Section 31 and the supplementals, there isn't a strong central storyline besides anthologies, and the rest of the episodes begin to reinforce the motifs and ideas for the Dread Powers, for the fears, for Smirke's 14. There are episodes that are like one-offs with no further connection elsewhere that illustrate the fears in a vacuum without expanding the storyline, such as 42 Grifter's Bone, 45 Blood Bag, or 50 Foundations, just to name some early examples. I don't really want to go much into them because I do want to save them for when I'm ranking them, talking about the episodes. So I just want to mention them. I want to save my thoughts. However, they are good episodes to explore the themes and motifs of the fears. And frankly, some of the best episodes of the show are one-offs in this season. There are, however, similar to season 1, episodes that begin to introduce a new season-spanning threads. Not as much as season 1. I only counted 3 new threads, but there's still a lot of threads continuing from season 1. But these 3 seasons begin a storyline that reaches its conclusion in later seasons, growing the interconnected story even more. More threads, more webs growing. From a top-down perspective, all the episodes, from a first-person listen through, without knowing all the names, all the recurring names, every story feels like one-offs, and so these 3 storylines could also feel like one-offs, but I know the overall story, so they're painted in a different light now. First one is episode 54, Still Life, with the taxidermy shop, which begins the storyline for The Unknowing, for me at least. Sure, it does pull from episode 1, Anglerfish, but I don't really count that as the beginning of the Unknowing storyline. Here, we're introduced to the gorilla skin, an important aspect of The Unknowing that doesn't get much screen time. It only gets like 1 line right now, but it will be focused on later, considering episode 1 had the anglerfish, which wasn't a main focus of The Unknowing until we were in there in that moment. I don't really count that as part of The Unknowing. 44 Tightrope could be considered an aspect of The Unknowing, or like beginning of the Unknowing storyline, as there is a mention of Gregor Orsanov, but it is only as a comment from Gertrude in like after the statement, and almost nothing within the statement itself proper returns, bar for Beacon and Hope. Either way, without really knowing it, we begin to learn about the stranger and the unknowing at this point, which isn't mentioned until the finale arc, and it is obviously a very important aspect as we begin moving forward. The second one is episode 57, Personal Screening, which is a personal favorite of mine, as this lonely episode is very terrifying, absurd, and intense. This episode establishes the Daedalus space station mission, which doesn't really get much focus on overall in the story, but is tangentially part of the People's Church of the Divine Host storyline because of Manuela Dominguez, of which we don't really get a full scope of until season 4, but because of its memorability and its sequel in season 3, this episode, sequel in season 3, I think it's 107, Matter of Perspective, that might be wrong. This episode does a bit of footwork. It also touches on organizations tied to people that we already know of, such as Pinnacle Aerospace, owned by the Fairchild family, a large investment by Nathaniel Lucas, and Optics Solutions Limited, address linked in Lanai Alisund. 3 red flags, all in one tiny episode. They sunk so much money into sending one man into space to keep him isolated and afraid. That is so absurd, yet I love it. The third one I want to talk about is episode 69, Thought for the Day, which, fun fact, when I tried looking for this episode in like pictures for it on Tumblr, I looked up TMA 69, and Tumblr was like, hey, we're not showing you anything because there might be explicit stuff here, which is hilarious. This episode introduces us to Annabelle Kane, an avatar of the web that becomes a major antagonist in the seasons after season 4 and 5. Overall, becoming the main primary antagonist of the entire show. But watch my season 4 and 5 retrospectives to get a full context of that. But either way, this is her first episode about a study in a university about spiders and fears. It takes a bit for this to come back to something of note, as Annabelle doesn't really come back until 123 web development. Maybe in 121 Far Away, but 123 is definitely when she comes back. But this episode is significant because of her anyways. Season 2 doesn't really introduce that many stuff, but the stuff that it does introduce sort of grows the story a lot more. Especially Annabelle Kane, especially Daedalus, especially the Unknowing.
All the pieces were there, and I couldn't see it.
Season 2 jumps off from the threads introduced in Season 1 for connected statements. Some episodes and storylines begin in Season 1, but the majority keep up storylines throughout the season so it can end in Season 3 or 4, or 5 even. Season 2 begins to chip away the idea of just anthology and begins to add in the more linear storyline, like I said prior, with the supplementals. And because of these interconnected stories, the story begins to feel larger and larger. And I love how the work that Season 1 does emboldens Season 2 to do all of that. So some episodes, like I said, end storylines that began in Season 1. I'm going to be doing a quickfire, not really quickfire, just listing it slowly enough. I want to give honorable mentions to these storylines in this video at least to show, just honor the work that Season 1 did that ends here. So in memoriam, I guess, for these storylines in terms of they concluded, not that they died or whatever. You know what I mean. Anyways. Episode 52, Exceptional Risk, ends Robert Montauk's storyline, showing us his death. But honestly, it is part of the larger Divine Host cult storyline that continues, but Robert Montauk doesn't show up anymore. Episode 55, Pest Control, is the last mention of Jane Prentice as a character, tying up her story. We do get mentions of her as a concept later on, but this is the last time we get her as a actual character. Jane Prentice was a very important antagonist in Season 1, obviously, and ending her story with this episode helps mark a change in the story as we begin to focus on other antagonists. I am counting 72 Takeaway as the end of the Tom Hand storyline, as he was an avatar barely focused on anyways, and his appearance in 130 Meet is so short. However, Gertrude Robinson does mention that 130 that Tom survives, so who knows what actually happened to him. We don't get anything from that. So this is the last time I'm going to talk about Tom Hand anyways. Other storylines, however, are continued a lot more, adding in more information about the people, places, or things, nouns, mentioned. These storylines move into later seasons, and now we're getting into some more rapid fire. My crew appears in 46, Literary Heights, to kill the Lichtenberg figure, and 75, A Long Way Down, to terrorize tourists in Paris. Michael Distortion appears in 47, The New Door, and 74, Fatigue, along with 48, Lost in the Crowd Supplemental, and throughout the finale arc. Jared Hopworth appears in 49, The Butcher's Window, to steal some ribs. Simon Fairchild in 51, High Pressure, nearly drowns a woman in deep waters. John Amherst in 68, The Tale of the Field Hospital haunts the story, a weird combination of an Avatar appearance and a Leitner book. Trevor Herbert in 56, Children of the Night, admits his addiction to the hunt. Hilltop Road in 59, Recluse, illustrates what exactly Raymond Fielding was doing before being killed by Agnes Montague, who in turn falls in love with Jack Barnabas in 67, Burning Desire, before burning half his face off. Every person builds upon their own mythos this season, increasing their memorability so that even if you weren't really paying attention in the first place, like I was, you would remember who they were when their return later on. Episode 63, The End of the Tunnel, marks the second return of Melanie King. And then 76, The Smell of Blood, is her third appearance, second statement concerning slaughter ghosts. Melanie King, of course, becomes a main character in season 3. And so this would be the end of Melanie King, the Ghost Hunt UK host, and the beginning of Melanie King main character TM. And also, Melanie helps begin the finale arc, but I'll get to that later. Overall, Season 2 statements and episodes help raise the tension and increase the stakes in the world, making it seem bigger and scarier than we first believed, adding legitimacy to the stories we already listened to and gearing up for something later on.
You saw her. She's like 100 years old and more cardigan than woman.
Oh, Gertrude Robinson. I wanted to save this part after I talked about the book of the season and later than John supplementals, because the things that John learned about Gertrude lead to the end of the story. The way the story begins to lay out the mysteries plaguing John is very outstretched, keeping us engaged throughout the season to make sure we don't miss anything. And I think it does that really, really well. There's never an overload of information. There's always little trickles of something that leads to a full cup of knowledge. I'm sorry about that analogy. First things to note, the first pieces of the puzzle John gains are the tapes Basira gets to him of Gertrude reading out statements. Episode 44 is our introduction to her voice as she reads a statement about the circus of the other. We hear her difference in classification style and her speculation after the fact, but this episode doesn't really illuminate anything for John, and only really adds to the story after learning about Beacon of Hope post-season 4. But for now, this is a great beginning to start understanding what Gertrude was doing. The next one we get is 53 Crusader, where Gertrude is taking a live statement from a former World War II veteran regarding a strange library he discovered in Alexandria. After the statement, Gertrude contemplates the theory of ancient iterations of an archive, which then begins to make John think about his own position as the archivist and makes him think of it less as a job and more of a role. Gertrude also mentions keeping the recording off the record, and thus John begins to learn not to trust the archives. He concludes this episode with the knowledge that Gertrude was not the person he thought she was. In 54 Still Life Supplemental, John reveals he found Gertrude's apartment and discovers her minimalist living space, along with the presence of a laptop charger, suggesting the existence of a laptop. Alongside that, a little spooky detail is that all of Gertrude's books, if there is a face, the eyes were carefully removed, which is a little spooky detail that was really interesting to include that we don't get a resolution of in season 2, but I know that it is because she's trying to make sure that she's not being spied on, because Elias can look through any eyes and she's just removing the eyes so she's not spied on in her own personal home. Very smart. The next tape John gets comes in episode 62, first edition. That's the tape that Daisy brought the last episode. In it, Gertrude's taking a statement of Mary Key, who is a recurring character that we've seen multiple times in past statements, who was talking about her first Leitner, her first edition. The voice actress for Mary Key, Carrie Cohen, is absolutely terrifying and amazing at bringing to life this strange woman. She does mention that the book, she calls it a Leitner, but it was before he was collecting the Lightners itself anyways. And they name the end as an origin for the book. And in the end, Mary gives Gertrude a page from the book, the catalog of the trapped dead. And Gertrude moves to hide it, revealing the sound of a creaky floorboard that she pulls up and puts it in, which John recognizes. He goes, pulls it up, and discovers her laptop and a key. The laptop's more important now for the season, but the key itself doesn't come back until season 3, so I'll let you know now that the key is for a storage space that they discovered in season 3. But for now, for season 2, the laptops are more important. In 65 Binary, after Tessa Winters delivers her horrifying statement, John asks her if she could unlock the computer. In 66 Held in Customs, in the Supplemental, we gain a lot of knowledge. Gertrude traveled a lot, and she ordered a lot of dangerous materials. Quote, petrol, lighter fluid, pesticides, and high-powered torches. John begins to wonder if organizing the archives, undoing Gertrude's mess, would be beneficial or not. But he begins to not trust Gertrude now because her old lady image has been removed from his mind. She's no longer just a senile, she's smart. At this point, he doesn't even trust Gertrude's motives, and thus he continues to investigate and organize. The next thing we discover makes him trust her even less. Gertrude was buying Lightners, using her account GR Bookworm 1818, which was the deactivated book buyer what was mentioned in episode 4, Page Turner. She bought, quote, a special printing of the Seven Lamps of Architecture by John Ruskin, that rather dubious copy of the Key of Solomon, and a 1910 pamphlet simply entitled A Disappearance. John shifts his questions from who killed Gertrude to why, because obviously she was doing something, and maybe if we find out what she was doing, we'll see who was threatened by it. Up until now, I've neglected to mention the Lightners. They are cursed books that harm and hurt people. We have seen many of them and have been more or less a reoccurring name since 4 Page Turner. The ones that we've seen so far are the Bone Turner's Tale in episode 17, The Bone Turner's Tale, Ex Altiora in episode 4 Page Turner and 46 Literary Heights, the Catalog of the Trapped Dead in 62 First Edition, and all of these books lead to pain and disasters, sometimes death. And in later episodes in season 2, after this episode, we get the Tale of the Field Hospital in 68, Tale of the Field Hospital, and the Book of the Dead in episode 70, Book of the Dead. All of these books were marked as being owned by Jürgen Leitner. Jürgen Leitner. I have to say Jürgen Leitner. Jürgen Leitner sounds so weird to me. I know, like, a past comment in one of my videos while talking about Jürgen Leitner, someone said they were obsessed with how I said Jürgen Leitner. But, like, yes, I know in the podcast they say Jürgen Leitner, but Jürgen Leitner feels more, I don't know, real to me than Jürgen. Like Jürgen? No, it's Jürgen Leitner. You know, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm gonna say whatever comes up to mind. Now that I've talked a lot about, now that I've said Jürgen Leitner, now it feels more natural. But it's whatever. We're just gonna move on. In episode 70 Supplemental, John talks about the books and how they keep coming back to them. He finds scraps of burnt books that he thinks Gertrude burned and turns his attention to the books themselves, because it seems like the thing that she was doing was the books, so the books are sort of like now what's up with the books, as well as the tunnels underneath the Institute. Unraveling the mystique of Gertrude Robinson and her death, making her a reoccurring voice in her statements, makes the mystery more present. At times, I forget that Gertrude's dead. The creators of the story did an amazing job writing this mystery. Also, shout out to Sue Sims. Her voice acting is god tier. I cannot stress enough how much I love Gertrude Robinson, and when Sue Sims performs Gertrude Robinson in the episodes, because I don't know what about that old lady's voice, just so good. And it's like when John's talking, when Johnny is reading out his voice acting, it's fine, it's normal, you know. It's just he's great. But then Sue Sims over here is giving a performance of a lifetime, and she doesn't even know. Does Sue Sims have a background in voice acting? I don't know, but like her voice acting is just fucking amazing. So shout out to Sue Sims. Every time I go on the Epcot ride in the Epcot ball, and it's a different old British actress. I forget her name. She's really prominent, but I forget her name right now. I think it's Gertrude Robinson.
So you really think the Institute is, what, haunted?
So I sort of like hedged around the topic. Alongside the Gertrude mystery, John also investigates the tunnels and learns various things as well. In episode 46, Literary Heights Supplemental, John notices the trap door to the tunnels being opened, and he knows someone else is going down there besides him. He sets up a camera to trap whoever is going into the tunnels, hopeful that he'll catch something that might answer his questions. After the intervention that gets him to stop suspecting his coworkers, John and 67 Burning Desires Supplemental manages to convince Elias to give him the key to the trap door, stating that that'll help his state of mind. He threatens to quit, saying that trying to work without knowing what is underneath him is hard. And Elias says it's going to be hard to replace him, so the key is given to him, which, like, first time listen through, Elias saying it's hard to replace him. Oh, so sweet, so sweet. Now, I will hunt you down, Elias. I will hunt you down and make you suffer for what you've done to my man. In 68, The Tale of Field Hospital Supplemental, John's lost in the tunnels, and his investigations are getting ahead of himself, and he is just scared and afraid. While he's been lost in the tunnels, he bumps into Sasha, who helps him out. He states she looks taller than expected, but like brushes it off as like nerves from being lost underground. In 69, Thought for the Day Supplemental, John's still reeling from the experience and hasn't gone back to the tunnels, but he knows he has to eventually because all of his clues have dried up. In 71 Underground, John discovers recent trash in the tunnels not present before, concluding that there is someone living inside the tunnels. Ooh. Because of this, he begins to like, all of the questions begin to narrow into like the direction of the tunnels, because he thought that the person who killed Gertrude was above, but now he knows that they're not, so they must be in the tunnels, and then he starts seeing stuff in the tunnels, and the tunnels are connected to Gertrude, and everything's just heading towards the tunnels. And finally, in 74, Fatigue, John's camera captures someone traversing the door that leads to the tunnels, and it is an older man, moving the door without doing anything. He moves the door. And I feel like that should be more comical in how it looks. So thankfully it's just audio. They move the door. Now, being able to focus on them, the person that is doing that now, they are the answer that he's been trying to find. John resolves to listen and wait and learn, not wanting to approach without being ready, because last time he pushed for more knowledge, he got lost in the tunnels. The way John's desperation for answers is written is so exciting as a first-time listener, and as a look back, so very tragic. He could have stopped at any time, but decided to do so despite everything. He wanted to learn more. He wanted to push for more. He wanted to push for more knowledge, and that is tragic.
Oh, no, is that another Sasha? Are you collecting them?
I've also been hedging around this topic. I have to be very, 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 very honest. I never realized Sasha had a different voice actress. I didn't have the savvy that I have now regarding podcasts, more so for this show. And I was writing along with John, not knowing anything about anything. I didn't even realize that she had a different voice actress. After showing John the alibis for everyone in the Institute, whenever he casts doubt on anyone else, namely Sasha, it sort of just lands in something odd and not noteworthy that we are like, yeah, that's interesting, that's cool, that's odd. Oh well, moving on, Like, Sasha was always someone we liked, a character that we enjoyed. The few moments that we saw of her in the first season, voiced by Lottie Broomhall, endeared us to her, and we liked her. And so just getting any information about her like life outside of the archives was great. Yeah, she got a boyfriend. Good for her. She goes to the wax museum every once in a while. People have their hobbies. So like I didn't really like care about the things that she's doing because we know that she didn't kill Gertrude. So there's nothing to look into. There's nothing to suspect about her. And shout out to not Sasha's voice actress, Evelyn Hewitt, who delivers the most mundane yet suspicious way of talking that, like, if you were not looking for it at all, you would not know. But now that you do know and do hear it, you can hear her like taunting or something. Shout out to Evelyn Hewitt and Lottie Broomhall for their amazing dual role of Sasha James. And again, like season 1, there are throwaway lines again and again. In 63, End of the Tunnel, during John's supplemental, Melanie comes in to ask about using the library. When she comes in, she says she was let in by a new girl and asks if John will write. John gets confused at the first statement of the new girl and responds in turn, and she believes him to be confused on the latter question of how he's doing. And she clarifies, saying he looks like hell, which gets him distracted now from the confusion. And now, oh, you're being mean to me. And he forgets about the new girl statement. Then, following up on this interaction, Melanie returns in 76, A Smell of Blood, to give her statement on war ghosts that she's been investigating. The episode prior, 75, A Long Way Down, Basira had given John all of Gertrude's tape, like I said before, and so this episode, he tells Melanie that he's very busy, but she convinces him to listen. After her statement, she shows John her investigations and what she's found. And this is, I do really enjoy this moment between John and Melanie, who do not like each other, but are like of the same academic mind, and grow excited whenever they have these revelations, these things that they found specifically about the slaughter. And it feels this is like I can see Johnny Sims having found this stuff in real life, and now where we are right now, me in this world, Johnny Sims, the writer, having found the text that they found in the story, and that text influencing him and his story for the slaughter. And so it really does feel like that's the text that they find, and they talk about it to explore the motifs and ideas of the slaughter. So it's a really interesting moment here that I enjoy a lot. And after her investigations, after she tells him about everything, she tells him that she's going to India to do further investigation. She says she wants to say goodbye to Sasha and asks where she is, which gets John confused. Sasha let her in here. No, that's not her. She was tall and had long hair and glasses. The woman who let her in is not Sasha. But John insists, yes it is. But Melanie insists, no it isn't. This isn't funny. And she leaves. In the supplemental, John thinks about what she has said and decides to look into the tapes Basira brought in. In 77, The Kind Mother is Gertrude's statement regarding a woman who believes her mother was replaced and no one believes her. In Gertrude's further comments, she believes it to be the not them mentioned by Adelard Decker in a separate case, as well as trying to guess at its motives and noting that magnetic tape and Polaroids are unaffected by the monster. Note, Tessa Winters mentioned how the tape that is being used to record is magnetic tape as well. And the monster, she says, as she says it, is an aspect of the stranger. And Gertrude says she would rather not draw its attention. John begins to connect the dots and notes that the tapes lost during Prentice's attack all had Sasha's voice on them, specifically her talking about the Calliope, her statement regarding Michael the Distortion, and then the tape that she had during Jane Prentice's attack that she was recording on. Before acting on this information, knowing he's all alone in this, he tries to find the statement mentioned prior, the one with Adelard Decker, to learn more. 78, Distant Cousin, is when he finds that statement about a man who believes his cousin has been replaced and no one believes him. In it, Adelard Decker I love you, appears with the web table, which we've seen prior episodes, and seems to trap the person who was not their cousin, and then he never sees them again. The web table, obviously, is in artifact storage right now. It was delivered along with John's Zippo lighter. That same episode, John reveals that he's found the missing tapes deep within Sasha/not Sasha's desk. He plays her voice when she talks about the Calliope, when she's giving her Michael distortion statement, the same moment when not Sasha takes her form. In the next scene, John tells Tim and Martin to go home because John's sick, as he's trying to get them safe. And maybe a few hours later, John enters artifact storage with an axe and thinks that destroying the web table will destroy the not them. And so he does! And then Michael Distortion appears and tells him to run away, as we hear the not Sasha begin calling out to John in a very creepily way, as instead of killing it, destroying the web table, set it free. Michael says, that was very stupid, which it was. In a bid to get away, Michael creates a door for John to escape from, and the episode ends. And thus, the finale arc reaches its climax. 79 Hide and Seek has multiple things occurring. First, a poem from Martin K. Blackwood is being recorded, and then they're recorded over by Tim and Martin, who haven't left the Institute, as Tim believes John's going to do something illegal and wants to stop it. He gets it recorded because he wants something like to prove in court of law, just in case he does something illegal and he can like testify against it. On the way, they bump into a transforming, not Sasha, all like long limbs, John, going into the tunnels. And they flee, catching their breath, and they're like, was that? Martin was like, is that? And Tim's like, no, that did not look like Sasha. Like, Tim, stop deluding yourself, babe. Then, in a really cool role reversal, Martin decides to jump into the fray to help John escape, not Sasha. And Tim is like, no, don't do that, and then just follows him anyways. We cut to John's perspective as he's left Michael's door and finds himself in the tunnels underneath the Institute. He berates himself for misjudging the table, berates himself about doing that stupid decision, but like, mistakes happen, buddy. And he flees when he hears the not Sasha approach. And we cut back to Tim and Martin back in the tunnels now, as they react to the thing that they think is Sasha but is not Sasha, and they argue and discuss how to help John. And all of a sudden, Michael appears, and he says he wants to see what happens to John. He doesn't want Tim and Martin to interfere. And then he traps Tim and Martin in the corridors. The POVs switch back and forth now as John, Tim, and Martin try to survive what's happening to them. In the process, John takes a metal pipe to defend him with. Then, not Sasha, who's chasing after John, taunts him and tells him her story of being trapped and wanting to escape, and then being used to spy on the Institute until he stupidly set her free, and mentions how he's going to miss the Unknowing, but unfortunately, he wasn't even going to understand what was happening. And just as she finds him and attempts to kill him, the walls of the tunnel begin to move and trap her inside. And then all of is quiet, and John hears a mysterious figure appear, and he says that he and John have to talk. Episode 80, The Librarian, the finale of this season, has John and the old man talking in John's office. John's still holding onto that metal pipe to protect himself, and he's sort of like using it to like threaten the old man. And he asks if Sasha is dead. The man says no, she's just trapped. The man says he needs John's help, and John insists that he answer his questions first before he helps them. And thus, the Jürgen Leitner begins his statement. Overall, Leitner's statement is equal parts informative and inconsequential. John's first question, how not Sasha was trapped, is answered with the book The Seven Lamps of Architecture, which in tandem with Smirke's architecture, he's used to control the tunnels, admitting to using it to guide John in the tunnels, as well as confirming that it was not Sasha who drew the weird arrow pointing him downwards, trying to flush Leitner out. Leitner then explains how he used to book a disappearance to get around unseen. He's been hiding in the tunnels since Gertrude's death. John asks if he's to blame for the books, the Leitners, and Leitner details how he began to collect them, implying, but not outright saying, some of the horrible things that occurred to the people he worked with, his assistants, because of these books. He described the attack on his library in 1994 and the horrible monsters that attacked and his escape. During this discussion, John asked him to elaborate on the powers and what we know to be Smirke's 14 that he keeps referencing. He keeps referencing very vaguely about these powers. And again, vaguely, he tells him about the eldritch forces that affect our world, and he uses an analogy of an ant seeing different aspects of a man as different forces in a way, which is a horribly simple analogy, but effective enough without all the information. And John mentions Michael, the distortion, and Leitner name drops the spiral, and he tells John to examine the things he reads about and what they mean, not what they are, right? Like he says something about like the bones mean something messy about the body, or is it like death, or is it like the violence or whatever? Like you have to analyze what they mean, the motifs and themes of what he's reading. John then asks if Leitner killed Gertrude and gets an unequivocal no. Leitner believes Elias did it because he and Gertrude were going to destroy the archives. John asks if the archives is powered by one of these forces, and Leitner names the Eye. He says, you already know the answer to that. You serve the Eye. And hearing that confirmation that John obviously was afraid of, knowing that he serves this bad evil force, and this confirmation that he does, that makes him stop and think. And weirdly, strangely, John doesn't push for knowledge. He gets overwhelmed. He needs to smoke a cigarette, a habit he's picked up throughout the season since getting the web lighter, which I looked back and checked and could not find moments where he talked about smoking, but there was a moment in the first season, in the finale, where Sasha tells Elias about John or something, and Elias is like, "Oh, he hasn't taken up smoking, has he?" But whatever. And so he leaves, declining to learn more. He says, "You stay here. I'm going to take a smoke. I'm going to get a smoke break, calm my nerves, calm everything down, and I'm coming back, and you're going to answer all of the rest of my questions." And Leitner, when he's alone, he's like, oh, he's not ready. He reminds me of you. He's talking to Gertrude, like in death, to record her. I think he's talking to record her. No, he's just talking to Gertrude in death, whatever, just in memory. And he says he's just not ready. But he does remind me of him. He reminds me of you, Gertrude Robinson, is what he's probably trying to say. And then Elias appears and talks to Leitner. And Leitner mentions the Unknowing about wanting Gertrude's notes and wanting to stop it. And Elias kills Leitner. Brutal pipe murder. To stop him from telling John more, to make John work on his own. Elias leaves, and when John returns, he flees when he sees Leitner's body. And later that day, Tim and Martin's recorder has started working again, and they find themselves back in the Institute. They mention seeing a woman inside the corridors, Helen Richardson, and talk about what they do when they all of a sudden stumble onto the crime scene, and the season ends there. This finale is a great culmination of all the work John's done, all of his investigating, only to show he still only has half of the information in the first place, and people still keeping it from him. And now, John and the audience, we are primed and ready for the full truth. And we want the full truth, the full story. And we know that something's going to happen in the future. Like, what is the unknowing? What the hell is happening? Why was not Sasha there? Why was she spying? What is happening? We want to know more. And now the status quo has changed. Now the Institute loses Sasha James. Sasha James is dead. Jurgen Leitner is dead. And John is accused of murder. The goals that the writer set out to do, maintaining momentum this season, creating more storylines, and also having its own story within it, is accomplished at the end of the season with everything that has happened prior. This episode ends the season in a very nice note.
Final comments.
Season 2 of the Magnus Archives is a great continuation for the Magnus Archives. Along with Season 1, it sets up more storylines that will culminate in the next season, arguably the most popular of all 5. And this season causes ripples within the story, not only plot-wise, but character-wise. John wanted more knowledge. He searched and searched for more, and he got too close and backed off, and then he came right back for more. He discovered Gertrude's secrets. He pushed into the tunnels enough that Leitner had to stop him from finding him. And he was there to listen through Sierra, Daisy, and Melanie's stories and came out with more information because of it. And now, because he backed away from Leitner, overwhelmed, scared, with the promise of more information, but needing just a moment, probably also compelled by his addiction to smoking, started by the Zippo lighter, he steps out, allowing Elias to kill Leitner, removing the source of information John so desperately needed. In the coming season, John will rush headfirst into danger, seeking for more because it's done him good before. And the moment he decided to stop, someone died, and he was back to square one. So he will not stop. And that is a tragedy, because we know that his pushing for more will be his downfall. And his pushing for more in this season has just reinforced how the benefits of that. That's the sad part. Season 2 is an amazing season with amazing statements, an ever-growing world, and more mysteries created within it that allows us to continue to Season 3, also pushing for more, also wanting more along with John. And I won't ever underestimate this season ever again. I do want to give a quick shout out to the voice actors introduced in this season. Mainly Frank Voss as Basir Hussein, Faye Roberts as Daisy Tonner, and Lydia Nichols as Melanie King. Those 3 characters were very instrumental in this season. And also shout out to Ben Meredith, obviously, as Elias Bouchard, and Mike LeBau as Timothy Stoker, along with, obviously, Jonathan Sims as John Sims, and Alexander J. Newell as Myron K. Blackwood. Voice actors are amazing. When I get to my rankings, I will also shout out the voice actors for when they appear in those episodes. So, yes, thank you so much for watching. I enjoyed taking a look back at this season to explore the many things being juggled in this season and to talk about it at length. Please take a look at the other videos I've made. I have a series counting all of the kills in all 5 seasons inspired by the Dead Meat channel, as well as retrospectives for season 1, 4, and 5, because I was crazy and needed to talk about the ending more than the beginning. Oh well. I will be putting out a ranking video for this season as well, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you very much. Stay away from strange tunnels, and I'll see you next time.